My dear friends and fellow Christians, today's gospel passage, taken from the Gospel of John, chapter 6, is commonly referred to as the Bread of Life discourse. Now, in this discourse, Jesus describes how he is the bread of life, and how eating this bread, his flesh, and drinking his blood will bring eternal life. Now, Jesus says to the people, "I am the living bread that came down from heaven, and that whoever eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world." Now, this is a difficult teaching, but Jesus lays it out very nicely for the people. You see, they'd been with him for several days at this point. He had just fed the 5,000 the day before, using the 5 loaves and the 2 fish that the small boy had. The people were hungry that day, and Jesus fed them all. And then the day after miraculously feeding all these multitudes of people, Jesus talks to them about how, similarly, God had fed Moses and the Israelites in the desert for 40 years with the manna, this bread from heaven. The people had been fed, so their hunger was abated. But ultimately in the desert, all those Israelites that were eating the manna had died. The manna in the desert did not prevent the Israelites from dying a natural death, as is the natural course of all our lives. Now, when Jesus starts teaching about the bread of life, about how eating his flesh and drinking his blood will bring eternal life, he says, "Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him." Jesus said, "Just as the living Father sent me, and I have life because of the Father, so also the one who feeds on me will have life because of me. Whoever eats this bread will live forever." Now, these are difficult teachings. I mean, Jesus is sitting there telling you to eat his flesh. And I think it's easier in some ways, for me at least, to understand this in the context of the Eucharist, that when we partake of the body and the blood at the Eucharistic table, that it is Jesus' real body, it is Jesus' real blood. It's in the form of the Eucharist, but it is the living bread come down from heaven. Many other faith denominations do not understand it this way. Jesus as the bread of life, it is hard to understand in a real way. But that is not even the most radical thing that Jesus said to the people during this bread of life discourse. The gospel says that after this bread of life discourse, many of his disciples returned to their former way of life. They no longer accompanied him. They walked away from Jesus. Now, the 12 apostles all stayed, but many of the other followers left. I'm sure some of them struggled to understand the drinking blood part. I'm sure some of them struggled to understand the eating flesh part. Jesus as the bread of life is a difficult concept, and it is hard to understand. But as I was looking at it further, I was trying to figure out, why did all these people leave? What else was Jesus saying during this time? And when Jesus is saying, "I am the bread of life, whoever comes to me will never hunger, whoever believes in me will never thirst," Jesus says, "I will not reject anyone who comes to me." Jesus says, "This is the will of my Father, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have eternal life. Whoever believes has eternal life." You see, it seems that one of the things that Jesus said, the concept that made some of these disciples uncomfortable, that made some of these disciples stop following him, that made some of the believers walk away, was this inclusive language, this all are welcome message that Jesus was teaching. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised at that. We say all are welcome. We say it all the time. But almost immediately when we do, the protectors of the faith, the militant hairdos of the world, they start their angry and hateful rhetoric. You see, they don't think that all are welcome. Not sinners, not divorced people, not women who've had an abortion, and certainly not the LGBTQ community. For some, the idea of an all-inclusive church is so abhorrent, so distasteful, that they will walk away from Jesus over it. Oh, they say that they're still Christian, but they've walked away from Jesus and his teachings. They walked away from Jesus when he said it 2,000 years ago, and we still have people walking away from Jesus over it today. Jesus tells us over and over that all are welcome, that all are worthy, that all who believe will have eternal life. And yet, even still, some of us struggle to accept and love one another. Some of us still to this day won't accept this fundamental teaching of Jesus, that all are welcome here in his house. So many of us continue to walk away from Jesus because of this teaching. Recently, a friend asked me to think about why it is that I'm a friend and ally to the LGBTQ community. And there are many reasons, including loyalty and support for my friends, for my family members, love and support for my children. a sense of justice for all. But the most compelling reason for me or any other Christian to be a friend and an ally to the LGBTQ community, or to the Black community, or to the immigrant community, or to any other community or group of people, especially when they're facing rejection or persecution, the most compelling reason to be their ally is because Jesus said that he will not reject anyone who comes to him. If Jesus doesn't reject anyone who comes to him, who are we to think that we can reject anyone on his behalf? You're not following God when you do that. You're not protecting the faith when you do that. You're not saving Christianity when you do that. What you're doing is walking away from Jesus Christ. Same as your small-minded, bigoted ancestors did 2,000 years ago when Jesus told them in the first place. So this month, as we celebrate Pride, this weekend as we celebrate Corpus Christi, remember that this bread of life, come down from heaven, this Jesus Christ, the Son of God, does not reject anyone, that anyone and everyone who eats his flesh and drinks his blood will live forever, that his flesh is true food and his blood is true drink. Remember that whoever means whoever. Don't walk away from Jesus over the inclusive nature of his message. Accept and live out that message, the message that all are welcome here at the table of the Lord. So everyone, have a blessed Corpus Christi and have a blessed Pride Month.